Morning, everybody. How we doing today? I can't think of a better way to start this episode than yet another fantastic version of the song "Summertime." It's one of those songs that there's just so many great versions of it. I've heard kind of electronic jazz dance remixes. I've heard, of course, Miles Davis. There's so many. It's a song I've played probably 10 different people in my DJ gigs over the years. It's always a fun interpretation. But this one is done by the great Booker T and the MGs. And that's Steve Cropper on the guitar. And he really kind of steals the show in this version. It just becomes this swampy, atmospheric, ethereal. The organ swells in there a little. I'm a pretty big fan of Booker T and the MGs. I got probably 5 or 6 of their albums. I got this one recently. I don't buy a ton of R&B nowadays. I have most of the stuff I kind of wanted for quite a long time. Once in a while, some seller will have something like, oh, that's interesting. I should grab that. It's a good price. And I filled this in recently, and here comes Crop, the guitar. And it's just got this swamp sorrow. You know, he's got that bayou country, mist in the air, the organ just thick and damp. You know, I mean, there's a dew that comes with that organ. It's like it settles on the pews. You can't really escape that. And then when the guitar comes in and gives us the soft, warm noodling, it just brings the swamp to life. Again, they're such a great rhythm section. And they backed a lot of other recording artists as kind of the backing band, Booker T and the MGs. Of course, Donald Duck Dunn and Steve Cropper went on to record hundreds of records together. And there's probably a lot of people out there that can speak more on that than I can. They even crossed over into the rock, funk, a lot of different eras those guys played in pretty impressively. I just enjoy this so much. The guitar is just perfect for me. So yeah, once again, "Summertime" is just this fantastic song that allows itself to be interpreted so many interesting ways. And that's one of the fun things about the jazz songbook, is that jazz, which so many people say all sounds the same, jazz allows for infinite varied interpretations of a song. Pop songs can only reinterpret a song so much. They're still going to echo the same melody. They won't change the instrumentation too greatly. After all, rock is mostly guitar, drums, bass, vocals. Pop might have some more sounds to it than that. But an Ed Sheeran song is never going to sound too different than an Ed Sheeran song sounds. Jazz, there's like vocabulary in jazz that's so much broader in terms of the instruments possible, from a Matt Matthews on an accordion to someone playing a harp, Dorothy Ashby, to trombones of Jimmy Cleveland and Curtis Fuller, to piano, to vibraphones of Cal. There's so many different ways you can bring a melody in a song. And if you're a guy like Ellington, you might choose 5 different instruments to voice parts of a melody to bring it all together into one. I don't think there's any genre. That's great. I don't think there's any genre that can reinterpret a piece of music as different as jazz can. Now, another guy, I found this record recently, he's famous for the song Scorpio from 71, 72 on the Sussex label. This is a later record that's on the Westbound label. And Westbound had some funkadelic, they had some early Ohio Players stuff. So it's a pretty well-renowned label. Dennis Coffey ends up there. And Coffey was one of the great guitar players of the Motown early soul funk scene in the 70s. He's a white cat with a beard and kind of long hair. He's a great player. And I just found this record from the same place I got the Booker T. This is Back Home. And this is most instrumental stuff. And if you listen to some George Benson, the Blackbirds from this era, that kind of fusion jazz, rock, funk. So a lot of this Dennis Coffey stuff's kind of in that same vein. It's definitely not trad jazz in any sense, and it's not straight fusion where it's out there on the edges of the universe. But I really was impressed by this record. I enjoyed it. It's fairly straight, some great horn arrangements, but the guitar playing, of course, is the center of the entire show, and he's really a great player, you know. And he's one of those guys that you've heard more than you realize. When you look at his list of sessions that he's on, it's a pretty impressive. It's a nice break there, nice and clean. So Dennis Coffey, again, it's jazz R&B. It's infused with elements of jazz, but the line is so broad for so many, and this has as much jazz to it as something like Sketches of Spain does. You know, these are all fusion elements of jazz as it grows into other branches and stuff. Good record. And Dennis Coffey stuff's not that expensive, which was cool to find out. Another great record on the Do 2 label, or Do Tone. It's got both variations because of a lawsuit being too close to dual tone. He changes to Do 2, I believe. But Carl Perkins, a great black pianist from the West Coast scene, like Jerry Wiggins. These kind of guys you don't really hear about very much. He played on some great sessions with Dexter Gordon. This record here with Leroy Vinegar and Lawrence Marble, it's some of the most swinging West Coast cool you'll ever hear. And it borders on just post-bop. It's just modern, expressive, with some of that West Coast cool element to it. It just swings so hard, though. To me, that's what makes it cool. Is it's got such a good underlying Gene Harris 3 sounds kind of pocket to it. I was listening to some Pandora last night, and I was impressed because like 4 or 5 songs in a row, I'm like, oh, that's who that is. Oh, that's who that is. And I was right. You know, you start to really hear things the longer you listen to this music, and you know Gene Harris when you hear him. You know Miles when you hear him. You know who else? There's a couple other guys like I'm like I knew right away. I'm like, oh, that's, you know, it's kind of fun. But this record has an interesting little story for me. I won this in a UK auction. Original red pressing of the red vinyl. I got it for like $60, like 40 some pounds. I was thrilled to win it for that price. It was actually a pretty good price for that record. And that was 3 months ago. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and it never showed up. Somehow I got lost in the confusion of the pandemic. Someone stole it. I don't really know. It never showed up. The seller finally refunded me my money, and so I went out to Discogs and I found another one. This one's not a red pressing, but it's still a nice old pressing, and sounds fantastic. Nice heavy thick vinyl, and he's really a great player. And I guess he had polio as a child, I was just told, and sometimes he even uses his elbow to inflect certain sounds on what he's doing, certain pulsing, and I imagine an elbow's not going to be too finite, so you're probably going to get a pound out of that. But good record, great record on the Do 2 label, which is a label that's not really a jazz label, but there's some great jazz titles on it. You know, some really great stuff. The Curtis Counts record, the Dexter Gordon Blows Hot and Cool. There's a record by Buddy Collette that's really fantastic, and this Carl Perkins. Those are the 4 that I found on Do Tone, and I mean to do an episode soon on all these small West Coast labels that sprung up in the 50s. Some of them do kind of a national scene jazz, but a lot of them are kind of focused on the West Coast scene, and there's probably 15 of them that I've discovered that all made a half dozen to 30 great records. And there's different focuses, but a lot of them do have a lot of crossover between the musicians and the scene, because the West Coast scene was that, and it was also much smaller than the East Coast scene in terms of the body numbers. You were going to get a lot of crossover, and what you got between Prestige Riverside and Blue Note in the late 50s, early 60s, you were getting that at all these little West Coast labels, and probably more so than the East Coast even, there was a lot of integration happening in these sessions. Probably in part because there was less players available of the highest level, and of course there's hundreds if not thousands of players in the jazz scene in these decades, because jazz was still a common thing for you to book for your events, your weddings, your parties. You booked a jazz band, a band that could play a lot of the standards of the day, make them danceable, and so there was a lot of players out there, but professional players, guys that knew their chops, guys that knew how to play any style, and guys who had a name. That's also part of what a label wants. They don't want to just bring in Joe Schmo, even though he's great. They want to bring in someone who's a bit of a name recognition to help sell all of these sessions. So if you can bring in a name drummer and a name bass player to do this first record with some unknown piano player, that's going to help you launch that guy's career. So to bring a Max Roach in or a John Lewis in, these names were helping sell other artists on the label. All kinds of guys, from Bob Brookmeyer to all the great cats on the Kenton and Woody Herman orchestras. So many great West Coast cats. And Dutone's a small part of that picture, and I'm glad to finally have this record. Now, another record I got recently, and I feel a little silly about not having had this until recently, is one of the best jazz records I've ever heard. And 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have said this, but if you wanted to find jazz with one session, with one record, with one artist, this is as good as you're going to get to finding the homage to melody, the inspiration of innovation, the pulse of rhythm and groove, the codification of the arrangement, the pulse of different. And we're talking about Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, who made 2 records together at Roulette in 61, 62. For CD people, they came out together as one in the 90s or 2000s. But this is volume 2. I got volume 1 coming in the mail. It's just a masterpiece of 2 guys who are beyond veterans at this point. You know, they're both in, I won't say the twilight, but they're both. Louis is so great at dropping these guttural thirds and fifths. There's Barney Biggert, I believe, on the clarinet. The musicianship on this, it's a small group setting. Ellington brings 5 or 6 of his guys, and Ellington just knows how to pick. And Louis, being one of the greatest improvisers of all time, and one of the greatest singers of all time, he uses his voice very much as an instrument. He goes, and he fills a little sound in here, and he'll sing a thing, and he'll add a little inflection at the end of it that gives it a kind of a tail off. And Armstrong is so naturally brilliant, you know, and that's part of what's hard to comprehend about Armstrong, is so much of his brilliance, so much of his ebullience. It's not thought out or processed or manufactured. It's just him just being, I'm Louis Armstrong, this is how I do. It just rolls off of him. The coolest, the hippest, the baddest. And Ellington is such a brilliant arranger and so conscious of space. His men are putting in seasoning around the great Louis Armstrong. And it's really a top-notch session all the way through from front to back. The horn players, the woodwinds, it's all just so perfectly done. The versions on here, where's the song list? Just Squeeze Me is fantastic. I Got It Bad and That Ain't Good's fantastic. Solitude, forget about it. It's one of the cool things about Ellington. His songbook is so sacred. It's so sacrosanct. And even Armstrong doesn't have a songbook of his own material like Armstrong. So Ellington's ego can be placated simply by saying, we're going to do my songs tailored to you, Louis, and what you do well. And to hear Louis singing these Ellington compositions, it's just so satisfying. It's literally the staccato tackiness of that. It's these guys are all so well tuned, so well refined. It's such a perfect expression of what jazz is, filled with joy, filled with fun, cheekiness, sexiness. It's not so refined that it's rigid and stiff and can't have a chuckle. Jazz is very fun. It's got a hand on its knee ready just to go, ha ha ha. We're laughing and telling stories to each other. I hear what you're saying, brother. Like that's, the horns are kind of accenting Armstrong and saying, yeah, I'm with you, brother. Yep. Oh, wow. She's that crazy, huh? It's a conversation. And when you have Louis Armstrong talking, oh yes, he says in this gravelly, you don't even know how great Louis is. Even after you've listened to him for 20 years, you're still like, that was so cool. And he didn't even think about doing it, he just did it. And that's part of the magic of Armstrong. It's this imagination coupled with this talent that reinvents modern music from really stem to stern. You know, the idea of being able to put my personality, my inflection, my how I feel right now into any piece of music, that's Armstrong. And he's doing it here now with the Bible of jazz, Duke Ellington's compositions, with Ellington piecing around, and there's Ellington just softly. Ellington never needs a ton of space. Ellington never needs a ton of patting on the back. Ellington knows how elegant Ellington is and how accomplished Ellington is, and his mom always told him how special he was. So Duke was in refined company, even if he was in a room by himself. He's still better than everybody else in that room. He doesn't need it. And the way he's so effusive with his responses and interviews tells you a lot about the man. He's coy, he's poignant, he's willing to put the question right back on you and deflect all the time, you know? And he certainly doesn't want to take too much of a compliment in the face of a camera. It's not how he wants to be displayed. His peacock feathers come out in his music. It speaks for itself, and I shouldn't have to express in words how I feel about my music. It's a bit like a David Lynch film. He'll talk about it, but he's not going to explain it to you. He's not going to sit there and talk about how great he is. He's kind of curious how it makes you feel. And Ellington's the same kind of coy. The music's... I said what I needed to say right there. And I know what it means and how I feel about it, but how it makes you feel, that's interesting to me. But me telling you how it makes me feel, so you can feel the same, that's not the point. The point is for you to take this how you and take it. And take it from there. And again, it's just pure genius. And here you have two geniuses coupled. And each version of these songs is a seminal version. And I can't imagine they had to take these sessions very many times. I bet you some of these are first takes. They just sound so fresh, so effortless, so... okay, let's do this. I'm ready. And these guys don't fuck up. They just don't. They're the best. There's so many fun. So much... Saturday Dance, you know... Want to go on the floor. I don't get around much anymore. One of my favorite Ellington songs. I love this. It's got such a fun, bubbly... It's a really great song. The versions sung by the great singer that he did within the 40s are outstanding as well, whose name escapes me right now, tip of my tongue. He records on Argo some, and he has a lot of records on Decca. I can't think of his name. The great Al Hibbler. He does great versions of these songs. But when you hear Armstrong here, it's so fun. Watch.
Mr. Sanders dance.
That's it.
Would be crowded the floor. Couldn't bear without you. Rocking around much.
And you probably can't hear it, but Ellington's on the high register of the piano just going clink, clink, clink. Just the softest angelic chords he's dropping in there. Some are single notes, some seem like they're little block chords. It's talking about a soft accent. You know, there's no brash ego saying, you have to hear me, I'm Duke Ellington. It's bling, bling. It's perfect. The last record I want to talk about today is a episode is by Johnny Hartman, one of the great singers of the jazz canon from the 50s into the 60s, of course, with John Coltrane, legendary work. And he says records of the 70s and 80s, some of them are in Japan only releases, but he's got this rich baritone voice, and he has an early record, or two at Bethlehem actually, from probably 55, 56, that show him kind of evolving into who he becomes, a great cabaret lounge jazz singer. And his third session was on the Regent label, the sister label to Savoy, and I couldn't find it for years. I made an episode a while back on my top 5 or top 10 most wanted records, and this was one of them. I never even had a chance to auction on one or bid on one. It was just so elusive. I do have a Savoy reissue of it, but that's not really enough. And I finally did get this It's You, It's Me, Just You, Just Me, sorry, on Regent. It's got some water damage to it, but the record plays wonderfully. I might have already talked about this, and if I have, I apologize, but I'm just so excited to have this in the fold. It's not as deep as, say, what he's doing at Roost in a couple years, or eventually at Impulse and ABC, but some of these numbers are more strings and orchestral. Some of them are more jazzy and swinging. It seems like this side's the kind of orchestral side. Let me just switch it real quick here and see if I remember correctly. Some fantastic players, hard to find. It's weird how some sessions are just so rare. You know, some regions, most regions are pretty tough to come by, tougher than Savoys, but this one in particular, boy, has been just a real burden to find. Joyful to have it in the collection finally. We're working on the coffee shop, as most of you probably have heard. Jazz Shepherd Coffee, we're excited about it. If you want to help support the coffee shop and the channel, please go to my Patreon, and you can donate and pledge money, $5 a month or whatever. Or if you want to just buy a t-shirt, there's coffee mugs, there's stuff in the merchandise shop below as well. If you want to support in that way, it's always appreciated. If you just want to hang out and talk jazz, it's always welcome. Appreciate your comments and your feedback. Have you heard that Armstrong Ellington record? You should. Tell me what you think of it if you have heard it. Of course, if you like Booker T and the MGs, let me know. Give me your comments and your feedback, guys. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Peace.